Oh, hello everybody. It's so amazing to see all of your smiling faces. People I recognise and some people I don't. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Claire Mitchell. I'm Product Director at Ivy House. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to the founder and creative director. She has been unwell recently, but is back on form now, Elke Edwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. So listen, it's really lovely to be here with you all again this afternoon. So I know a number of you were on the webinar a couple of weeks ago, but some of you weren't. So what I wanted to say is I'm just going to spend a couple of moments just explaining who we are, who Ivy House are, why we're here, so that you guys understand why we're doing what we're doing, and then we'll get on to the subject that we're all here to listen to. So for those of you that have already heard this, as you know, with the team at Ivy House, we've spent about 20 years of our careers working with the most senior leaders across businesses. And it was incredible. We worked with about 40% of the FTSE 100, won countless awards for our work. But while we were doing it, something kept bugging us. And the thing that kept bugging us is, why is only the very best learning available to a tiny, tiny percentage of the most senior people? So that thought wouldn't go away, we just couldn't let it go, actually. So we changed our whole lives, and we ended up selling our business and starting Ivy House. So we still work with a range of incredible companies, but now we work with their emerging leaders, their graduates, their apprenticeships, the people at the beginning of their careers, or maybe not even at the beginning of their careers, but the people that are going to be the leaders of the future. So it's not really about age, but it's about whether or not you have the appetite and energy to go and be the leaders of the future. We also work with a whole range of schools. Last September, we piloted in these schools the Ivy House Award, which brings this incredible learning to sixth formers. And in September this year, that is now going out to a whole host more schools that are really, really interested in putting human development, you know, the skills we really ought to be teaching kids, into education system. So that's who we are, it's what we do. Everything we teach manifests around these 7 life-changing skills. And clearly I could talk for days on these skills, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to focus in on one particular skill, and that's the skill of intentional relationships. So I really hope that you took the time before we started to grab yourself a pen and a paper, because I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions as we go through this. So make sure you have that pen and the paper. And then before we start, just one final setup question. What do you need to do to give yourself this time? I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have about 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. But you can ask questions throughout. Claire will be there. Tim's also here answering any questions that you have throughout the session. But what do you need to do to allow yourself a few moments for yourself? Do you need to turn off your notifications? Do you need to put your phone under a pillow? Do you need to lock the kids in the wardrobe? Anything to give yourself the space. Okay, let's start then. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I would like you to think of a relationship that you would like to be better. Now, this could be a personal relationship with your partner, a kid, whatever, or it could be a relationship in work with your peers, your boss, somebody that maybe works for you. Just name a relationship that you would like to be better. And now, having chosen a relationship that you're going to work on, what I'd love you to do is put into the chat box so that Claire can share with me 3 words that describe that relationship. Just chuck out some words for us. Give me 3 words that describe that relationship.
So we've got a few words coming through now, Elke. So the first person has used the word tense, and there's some repeats of that. Tense, competitive, not trusting, condescending, superficial, strained, frustrated, volatile, distant, strained and friction, formal, challenging, painful, distant, avoiding, stagnant, intimidating, rushed, new, distant but potential, feeling a bit unpredictable, sensitive, awkward, frustrating, disrespectful, and one-sided.
Isn't it amazing just hearing those words? I don't know if that had an effect on anyone else, but God, that really brought my energy down, just actually having those words out there when we think about relationships that we're in. Okay, so I also want you to hit the chat button for this next question. And I'd like you to share with me, what's the one thing, and I know it's probably many, but what's the one thing you think needs to change about that relationship? Just the one thing. If you could just change one thing, what would it be?
We've got communication coming up quite a lot. My approach, better communication, more respect, more commitment, attitude, two-way communication, authenticity. We need to be equals, more listening, more transparency, more engagement, more openness and trust, a bit of vulnerability, empathy, that's really nice, communication and honesty, trust, a bit more time, more transparency, perception of what both of us is trying to say before we say it, but lots of people saying communication or a variation of communication.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. I really appreciate that. So we're in the right place then, because my aim in this next 40 minutes or so is to give you clarity on how to improve any relationship. What I'd like to ask you to do is to hold the relationship you've already started thinking about as we go through this session. But the aim of the session is to give you clarity on how you can improve any relationship. And to do that, I'm going to do three things. The first is I'm going to look at what creates a relationship, what makes a relationship. Secondly, we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about your commitment to change within that relationship. It's very, very easy to focus in on other people's need to change. And finally, I'm going to share a model which I love, the ABC of relationships, and how it really can go very deep into helping you understand how to structure that change. So let's look first then at what creates a relationship. Now, I know a number of you were on our webinar a couple of weeks ago. We spent a lot of time talking about mindset and also a lot of time talking about behavior. Behavior is the key ingredient of any relationship. So just imagine for a moment that you and I are in a relationship together. And in between us, you're there, I'm here, I'm in Godalming in Surrey, and you're wherever you may be. But in between us, there's a space. And we put into that space behavior. So for example, if I put in love, care, compassion, listening, interest, fun, excitement, but you put in disinterest, no listening. I don't know, what's the opposite of listening? Not listening. Aggression.
Talking, Elke.
Talking, yeah, shut up, Claire. Talking. So yeah, you put in that, and I put in all these loving relationships. The ingredients that we put in between us is what creates the relationship. And a really easy way to think about that, and we talk about this a lot on our programs, we spend a lot of time making cakes on our programs. We talk about, let's imagine that you and I are in this relationship and we're both making a cake in the space between us. And you're putting in flour, eggs, sugar, chocolate chips, and I'm putting in sand, mud, gravel, ground glass, I don't know, whatever it might be. When we put in those different ingredients, it absolutely impacts the kind of relationship that we are going to create. So I want you to go back to the relationship you talked about, you were just talking about a moment ago. And I want you to just, on your piece of paper, write a line down the middle. And on the one hand, I want you to list some of the behaviors that you put into that relationship. What are the regular behaviors that you put into that relationship? And on the other hand, I want you to list some of the behaviors that they regularly put into that relationship. Just list a few down. Now let's have a few shares. Let's start with the behaviors that you're putting in. Just give me some of the behaviors you think you're putting into that relationship.
Avoidance, some defensiveness, some listening, some reaching out, a bit of cynicism, a bit cynical, being the fixer, attempted engagement, inconsistency, recognition, challenge, friendship, resentment and neediness, criticalness, anger, time, effort. So a real mixture, some positive, some negative.
It's a real mixture, but what I'm loving is the honesty of it. You know, actually recognizing, and whoever it was that said cynicism, and we're going to talk a bit about that in a moment, because that's a brilliant amount of self-awareness right there, is understanding what we're actually putting in. So let me ask you another question. This is just one for you to reflect on, really. Is the behavior that you are putting in, and we're only going to deal with you for a moment, is the behavior that you're putting into that space between you, is it aligned with what you want? So if I want a loving, respectful, caring relationship with my children, am I putting loving, caring, respectful behavior into that relationship? Is your behavior aligned to what you think you want from that relationship? And if not, why not? What belief are you holding that means you are choosing one behavior after another over another? So here's the thing about behavior. And as I say, for those of you who were with us a couple of weeks ago, we talked a lot about this. No matter what is going on in a relationship, somebody comes in and they shout at you, somebody comes in, they're avoidant, they won't communicate with you. I mean, God, that's so frustrating. You know there's something wrong, but no, they're fine. But whatever it is, whatever behavior they're choosing is an event. And here's the thing about our behavior, is we get to choose how we respond to that event. In any moment, we can choose the response that we choose in that moment. That's the magic ingredient. And it's a really, really important ingredient for our relationships. So let's imagine for an awful moment that you discovered your partner was unfaithful. It's quite hard to discover right now, I suspect, but maybe not to discover, but hard to do. But let's imagine you discovered your partner was unfaithful. That would be the event. You would have the choice about how you behaved in that moment. Let's imagine you had a boss that maybe never did what they said they were going to do, or were really good at taking the glory from you and not giving you credit where credit is due. Again, that is an event, and you get to choose how you behave. So no matter what is happening, the behavior we choose to put into any relationship we're in is going to influence the results. Now, I'm going to ask you that question I just asked you earlier. If your behavior is not mirroring what you want from that relationship, why not? And I suspect for most of us, it's because we're sitting at the end or the bottom of what we at Ivy House call the ownership ladder. So when we're at the top of the ownership ladder, we're taking 100% ownership for who we are, how we show up, the behavior we choose in any moment, and in fact, the experience of our lives. But when we're at the bottom of the ownership ladder, we spend most of our time blaming others and situations for how we're behaving. So of course, that's really easy right now. We're all in lockdown. It's really, really easy to maybe blame what's going on outside for our bad mood, our frustration, our fear, our anxiety. It's very easy to blame the people that we seem to be living with 24/7 for getting on our nerves and therefore determining our behavior. But the reality is until we own our behavior, until we own our experience for life, then actually nothing in our lives is going to change. It's that power of owning our behavior, of coming to the top of the ownership ladder, that will enable us to make any changes in our relationships, in our work environment, whatever that might be. So that's the first part of what I wanted to talk about today. What makes a relationship? The key ingredient of any relationship is behavior. So the second thing then is, are you prepared to learn and change? Now, this is really, really interesting because, you know, we spend a lot of time working on relationships on all of our Ivy House programs. But what's fascinating is relationships are always in almost this magical thing where people believe they either work or they don't work. You know, we're either meant to be together or we're not meant to be together. And quite frankly, it's a load of rubbish. The reality is any relationship can be better. Any relationship can be better. But the truth is that we have to be prepared to learn how to do that and learn how to change if we want to make that relationship better. And that's the question for you, is what are you prepared to do to make that better for you? Because the skill of intentional relationships, the skill we're talking about today, is about consciously creating your relationships from a place of trust, respect, and understanding. And that's the skill that anybody can develop if they're prepared to leave their egos at the door and learn how to change and show up differently to our relationships. Now, we need to just jump very quickly to this, to the elephant in the room, because what I know to be true when we do this kind of training is that everyone's going, yes, I am prepared to change. Of course I am. But the problem is they're not. So what do? You know, if only I could get my boss to listen to this and make these changes, then it might be okay. But what do we all do if we're prepared to change, if we're prepared to show up as our best selves, but somebody else isn't prepared to do that? What I'm going to ask you to do for the rest of this talk is until the end actually, is to park your elephants. If there was such a thing as an elephant park, I would like you to park your elephants. And for the rest of this talk, I just want you to focus on you and what you are prepared to do. And then we're going to come back to the elephant. So let's look then at the ABC of relationships. And this is the tool that you can use for any relationship that you want to be better. And I would suggest you should use it for any important relationship in your life. And it starts with aspiration. So going to the relationship that you were talking about this morning or thinking about first thing, not this morning, this afternoon, I want you to just jot a few words down on your pad about what are you aspiring to? What does good look like for you in that relationship? If it's a personal relationship, you know, I'm not just talking about where you're going to live and what car you might have and when we can all get out, what kind of holidays you're going to go on. But I am talking about things like, you know, having a deep personal vision, shared visions, and not just stuff and goals, but feelings. How do you want to feel in this relationship? What do you want to experience in it? How do you want to grow? Feel like you belong? And how do you want to evolve and change over time within this relationship? So just take a moment or so to make some notes for yourself. Now, let me ask you, having just got a small sense, and what I suggest you do at the end of this is go away and actually really write out a very clear vision for that relationship. But having got a small sense of what your vision is for that relationship, let me ask you a question. Is that a shared vision? Have you ever sat down and shared your vision and brought and understood their vision and brought the two together so you have a shared vision for this relationship? And what I tend to find is that in personal relationships, people will go, oh, we sort of have, we know what's important. But when they get down and they do the detailed work, they realize they haven't done it anywhere close to where they need to have done. So it tends to be more that people do it in maybe marriages and intimate relationships. But let me ask you about your relationships with your parents, for example. If you have a shared vision of your relationship with your parents, I know we've had a number of students listening into our webinars, and I find it, you know, parent of five teenage girls, and what I know to be true as we grow up, we need to renegotiate our relationships. So actually getting understanding now, you know, maybe now I'm 17 and I'm 18. What does good look like for this relationship? Or maybe I'm 34 and my mother is still trying to control my life. What does good look like for an evolving relationship? So that's the first question. How clear are you on your aspirations, and are they shared? You both articulated what you want from that relationship. The second A is around agreements. Now, most relationships operate on expectations and not agreements. But if we're going to have a great vision and an aspiration for our relationship, what agreements do you need in place to make that a reality? Claire, I'm going to nick one of your stories, if I may. Claire always tells a story about when she, I don't know if it was when you first got together with your husband, Mitch, but you had a very clear expectation that it was a boy's job to take the bins out. It's an expectation I happen to agree with, by the way. But it was a boy's job to take the bins out. And you sort of noticed that occasionally he did it and occasionally he didn't do it. And you started to get a bit angry, and eventually one day when you were having an argument, you're going, and you never take the bins out, or you only hardly ever take the bins out. What turns out was that Mitch had an expectation that the bins was a shared job. Now that's a very light-hearted example, but the reality is when we work on a level of expectations, it's like your partner or your boss has a set of invisible rules that they haven't shared with you. So, for example, I've seen bosses get really, really angry with people that work on their teams that don't communicate with them enough, or their communications are in long form and they want bullet point communications. So the really important thing is when we've decided what good looks like in terms of our relationship, that we then create a set of agreements about how we achieve that. So if it's in a work environment, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to share successes? How are we going to deal with things when they go wrong? How are we going to deal with things when we feel conflicted about things? These are the sorts of conversations that we're going to need in any relationship. Now, right now, when our work relationships are under a whole load of new pressure, working off agreements as opposed to expectations will allow everybody to know where they stand. It's really important for leaders that they become very, very clear about what their agreements are with their teams. So those are the first two parts of the ABC, both aspiration and agreements. So let's move then on to the B part, and let's look at beliefs. Now, beliefs, this is one of my favorite diagrams. Beliefs are the lens that you see the world through. And you know, when you go and get your eyes tested at an optician's and they put on all these different lenses, and through that lens, eventually, finally, the words at the bottom of the room become really clear to you, and you can see the world as it's really meant to be. Now, that's what our beliefs are like. We have these beliefs, and we believe that the way we see the world is the way the world is. It's true, isn't it? We believe that we, for some reason, were the chosen one that got to see the world just as it is. The problem with our belief glasses is that we don't know we're wearing them. So imagine for a moment that you grew up in, let's imagine you were born in exactly the same year in a tiny rural village in Afghanistan. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe you would have a different set of beliefs than you have right now? And what that proves is that our belief systems are just randomly picked up from our families, our society, our education, what we read, who we listen to, and then we put them on, but we don't know they're there. And we see the world as we are meant to see it, not as we're meant to see it, as we think it is meant to be seen. Now, the really, really important thing about this in our relationships is whoever you are in a relationship with, they have their own set of belief glasses too. They have their own lens on the world. And they believe that God has chosen them and they are the chosen one, and only they can see the world as it really is. And until we recognize this, until we recognize that actually our view of our world is just our view of the world, and it is unique and different, but not a truth. Until we understand that, it's going to be very hard for us to relate to people that have a different set of belief glasses. So understanding the beliefs we hold about ourselves, about the person we're in a relationship with, about the relationship itself is going to be key to improving any relationship. And to that end, I'd like you to grab your pen and paper again. And I'd like you to just, in fact, no, don't do the pen and paper thing. Let's just sit for a moment. Get really comfortable if you're not comfortable already. I want you to take a deep breath and I want you to close your eyes. So take a deep breath in and a deep breath out and close your eyes. And I'm going to just ask you a few questions. First question, what do you believe about yourself in this relationship? So for example, you might believe that you will only ever be happy in this relationship. You might believe that you are less than you could be in this relationship. You might believe that somebody is holding you down or back. What do you believe about yourself in this relationship? Now, what do you believe about them? For example, you might believe they're never going to change, that they're very competitive and are always out to get you, that there's no point in talking to them because they won't listen. What do you believe about them? And the final question is, what do you believe about yourself in this? Sorry, what do you believe about the relationship itself? Do you believe it will never work? Do you believe it's doomed? Do you believe it was sent to you from a greater force? What do you believe about the relationship itself? Okay, open your eyes. Understanding the beliefs that we have about any relationship at all, is absolutely key. Because what it does is it shows us the barriers that we are putting in front of ourselves to allow this relationship to get better. So when I asked you earlier around, are you actually prepared to learn and change? Part of your learning and changing is understanding the beliefs that you're already carrying and learning to let them go. So that's the key question here. Are you prepared to let go of your weakening beliefs about this relationship? And stop them getting in your way of improving it. Now, this is a really interesting question because a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are really, really connected to their set of beliefs about the person, about the relationship itself, and who they are in that relationship. But if those beliefs aren't serving you well, if those beliefs are holding you back from being the best person you can be in that relationship, it's going to be very, very hard to work on that relationship. Now, what's interesting when we do this work on the program, what we find is that people want to hold on to those beliefs because they sort of believe that if they let go of them, it's going to weaken them, that they're going to be, they don't stand up for what they believe and they can't stand up for themselves. But the reality is it's those beliefs that are standing in your way from being your stronger self. This doesn't mean you have to put up with anything you don't want to put up with. What it means is if you want to improve the relationship, you need to see it through a cleaner set of lenses. Because if we go back, of course, our beliefs will drive our behavior. If you believe this other person is never going to listen, is never going to change, the behavior you'll choose is you won't ever go and have a conversation with them. You'll just let them, let it carry on, and you'll go, well, I told you that's why they were like that. So until you are prepared to let go of those beliefs, it's going to dramatically affect the behavior you put into the space. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about behavior because we've already discussed it, but I do have 2 questions for you about behavior. The first is, how often are you blaming them for how you're behaving? Do you believe that your behavior is a result of who they are, not who you are? And is that how you want to continue? Remember, you can choose your behavior when at any point in your life, in any relationship. They're not choosing your behavior for you. Now, I'm not going to deny the joy of blaming somebody else for my behavior. I love it, and I've got to tell you, I do it quite regularly. You know, it's always my husband's fault if I get angry or frustrated. But I know well enough very quickly to catch myself and apologize and own my own behavior. So the second question then I have about your behavior is, are you setting yourself up for success? And what I mean by this is, are you looking after yourself well enough to ensure that the behavior, it's easy for you to choose the kind of behavior that's going to drive the relationship you want? Let's imagine it's a boss that you're really, really frustrated with. Yeah. And you're not looking after your mind and you're thinking about that boss. So you spend an awful lot of time in thought spirals. He's a bastard, you know, he's never going to change. He's never going to give me the promotion I deserve. And you spend a lot of time in those thought spirals. Are you giving yourself the chance of success in that relationship? Because for us to show up with our best behavior, we need to look after our mind and our bodies and our souls. Looking after our mind is really, really about understanding what thoughts we're hanging out with. And if you want more on that, please go back and listen to the mindset webinar of a couple of weeks ago. Looking after our bodies, of course, is about, are we getting enough sleep? And blimey, looking after our bodies right now, in fact, mind, body, and soul couldn't be more important right now. But are you getting enough sleep? How has your pattern changed since you started to work at home? Are you putting in boundaries between work and home? Are you just seeing the computer there and you might as well just continue because it's there? And what about your soul? Are you feeding your soul on a regular basis? I know a lot of us have had things that feed our souls taken away from us, but there's an awful lot we can do to give ourselves a reboost. Now, the reason I'm focusing in on this is this will absolutely affect how you show up and the behavior you choose in relation to any of your relationships. So, are you setting yourself up for success? And if you're not, what more could you do to do that? Are you proud of the behavior that you're putting into the space in the relationship we're talking about? So the final piece of the ABC is C, obviously, and it's communication and conversations. So I'm going to move on to conversations because I've got to tell you, I think that is absolutely crucial. But people often say to me, why is it communication and conversations? Aren't they the same things? And I've got to tell you, absolutely not. I want you to imagine for a moment, think of yourself with this person that you're talking about, the relationship. What kind of body language do they bring to that relationship? Are they open? Do they have eye contact? Do they ask you about yourself? Do they share about themselves? Do they bring a really positive, energizing energy? Or are you in a room with them and they avoid eye contact? They're completely silent, and absolutely fascinating that somebody can say and do nothing but emanate a kind of energy that drains, sucks the energy from the room. So what kind of communication are you both putting into that relationship? And does it change? If you're in a really good mood, you show up with all great energy, you're quite chatty. If you're in a bad mood, then boy, do they know it. So I want you to just consider, are you an eye roller? Are you an avoidant of eye contact? Are you a silent but deadly? Do you slam doors? Are you the sort of person that says, I'm fine, when somebody asks you if you're okay? Do you not engage? Do you not share? Or are you an aggressor? Do you get angry? Do you blame? Do you bang things? What kind of communication do you choose? Now, I'm going to do the final piece, which is around conversations. And to do this, I want you to bring to mind your last difficult conversation with this person. And if you haven't had one, then that's fine. Think of a difficult conversation with somebody else. But just bring to mind a difficult conversation. And often difficult conversations aren't like we imagine them to be. You know, often they're not necessarily shouty or aggressive. Sometimes they're just really tense and awkward or sarcastic or not sharing, you know, when people just don't give of themselves, give monosyllabic answers. So bring that conversation to mind. Now, I want to ask you, in that conversation, are you above the line or below the line? Everyone's going, I haven't got a clue what you mean by that. But I'm going to explain. When we're above the line in the conversation, we're motivated by learning. We're open. We listen to people. But when we're below the line, we're motivated by being right and winning. So ask yourself, in that conversation, even if you were being super polite, were you motivated by being right and winning? Or were you open and curious? Now, I've got to tell you, after years of doing works and conversations, that 95% of us spend most of our time being below the line in difficult conversations. We believe the purpose of a difficult conversation is to get our way, or to make them see it our way and make them see the light, or slowly manipulate them so that they can think they've come up with the answer themselves. But actually, that's not what delivers a great relationship. I want you to ask yourself, when you're doing that yourself, how do you feel when somebody is doing that to you? So, you know, imagine for a moment that you're having an argument or a conversation with your partner because you want to go on holiday somewhere, but you want to go to different places. And they start telling you why, you know, oh, I don't know, Iceland is the place to go on holiday. But I actually really want to go to Greece. And he's going on and on and on about going to Iceland. Now, am I actually listening to him? Or am I letting him talk while I formulate my argument in my head? That is absolutely smack bang at being at the bottom, below the line, because I'm not listening. I'm not trying to find out why Iceland might be a good place to go. All I'm doing is listening for points so that when he takes a breath, I can actually come in with my point and prove him wrong and win the argument. So maybe we could have a share at this moment. Claire, I'd just like people to share with us on the chat. Take a percentage of time when you're having difficult conversations. What percentage of time would you say that you are below the line? I'm not asking you specifically, Claire, because I know obviously that you're above the line most of the time. But for the rest of us, what percentage of time do you think you spend below the line?
But below the line, we've got 80, 70, 75, most of it 95, 90, 70, 90. There's 40% from a couple of people, but most are 70% or more. In fact, everybody that's responded has been 70% or above, one 50%, one 40%. So we had one 40%, one 50%, everybody else 70% or higher.
So again, you know, I'm just going to applaud the honesty, because you're right. I'm sure you are. And as I say, we've been teaching this stuff for years, and blimey, every day I'll be in a conversation, I'll go, where am I? Am I above or below the line? Am I just trying to win right now? Am I trying to be right? Or am I really curious? Because when I'm above the line, I say things like, wow, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Tell me more. And I actually listen to what they say. And I don't really mind changing my opinion. I literally just move on and go, okay, I get it. That's fine. We can work together and we can change. When I'm below the line, I'm not listening. I'm closed. I might either get a bit aggressive. I might talk a bit louder. I might just fold my arms. I've seen this in meetings. I love it. People lie back, fold their arms, look at the ceiling, avoiding eye contact. You know, it's a really manipulative behavior, right? They're talking away and I'm just going to look over here. So if we want to improve our relationships, the most important thing we can do is be above the line. And I just want you to ask yourself for 1 minute, what it's going to take for you to come above the line. And here's a really important thing here. We talk a lot about courageous learners in Ivy House. It's one of our key 7 skills, one of our Ivy House 7, to be a courageous learner. Courageous learners often find themselves below the line, but when they are, they know it and they do something about it. So you'll often hear, we go, oh, hang on, wait a minute, I'm really sorry. Can we start again? And that is adjusting my mindset so that we can, I just need to move above the line. I need to genuinely engage in this conversation. I need to hear you. I need to listen to you. And I need to be prepared to change and have a different opinion, because remember, when we're wearing our lenses, we think we're right. But guess what? They think they're right too. So what would it take for you to be above the line? Here's the crucial thing. When it comes to relationships, if we're going to play to win, we've already lost. Good relationships isn't about playing to win. So, in summary then, what does good look like in a relationship? We need clear, agreed visions. We need to have had the conversation. And don't do the whole, oh my God, that's too cringy. I couldn't do that with a friend. I couldn't do that with my boss. I've got to tell you, some of the best relationships I've seen in a work environment, people actually sit down and they go, what does good look like between us? How should we communicate? What are our agreements between each other? Then we need to take a good look at our beliefs. Are they strengthening beliefs or are they weakening us? We need to actually choose behavior that aligns to the vision. And we need to take 100% ownership of that behavior. Our own mood, our own happiness, our own well-being. That's nobody else's responsibility. It's only ever ours. We need to have effective, regular, above the line conversations. And we need to know that we can only change ourselves. If you're putting all of your energy into saying, my life would be great if that person only did X, Y, and Z, playing to lose. So let's come back to our elephant. What do we know? What do we do if the other person doesn't know this stuff? Well, I hope what we've learned here is that by changing the ingredients we put into the situation, and even if it's just calling their behavior or, you know, moving away from the relationship, bringing more listening, bringing more caring, whatever we choose to do here, we can change the ingredients of any relationship. So I want to return to the question I asked you right at the beginning. And if we could just share this to end on the chat. If you're going to improve this relationship, what's the one thing that needs to change? Just share anything with us on the chat.
I've got my attitude, my mindset, listening more and taking on board feedback. I love that one because I think I'm great at taking feedback from everyone apart from my husband. And he did point this out to me and he was absolutely right. Honesty, remembering to revisit the agreement, openness, attitude, genuine listening. Check in if I'm proud of my behaviour, my ingredients, thank you. And consciously employing more empathy, absolutely. Compassion, needing to engage, starting the difficult conversation honestly.
Yeah, brilliant.
Focus on the aspirations and the vision.
Thank you.
Deciding, I think it's really important to say deciding if there's a desire for the relationship to continue, because we've talked about the elephants in the room. And please don't think that we're suggesting to anybody you have to stay in a relationship that isn't good. If that other person continues to put in bad ingredients and you've role modeled what you want and you've put in good ingredients, then of course, sometimes the right decision is to decide that that relationship isn't one to be in any longer and to move away from it if you have that choice.
100%. I heard a brilliant phrase, just a quote on the radio the other day, which is, if you really don't like somebody, pull up a chair and get to know them better. And I think by employing this approach, by actually being above the line, being genuinely curious, why are they choosing that behavior? What's going on for them? And leaving, as I always say, your ego at the door and being there for them and being genuinely curious. And I think pretty much any relationship can improve. So I want to thank you for your time today. You can follow us on all of these social media, but go out and, for God's sake, right now, we need our relationship to be good. So do the work that's required to make them better.